To those who have played the previous entries, the opening theme of Silent Hill 3, You're Not Here, shouldn't come across as jarring. At this point, guitar rock laden with melancholy had long since become the signature style of Akira Yamaoka, and by extension, the Silent Hill franchise. What might catch even the most ardent fans off guard, however, was the decision to include vocals in the opening for the first time in the series. This makes You're Not Here stand out amongst both Silent Hill's title track and Silent Hill 2's theme of Lara. This may come across as a strange misstep, but personally, I find the choice fitting. To me, You're Not Here evokes the sound of many women-led 90s alternative rock bands like Garbage, Hole, or even deeper cuts like That Dog. All of which are groups I feel would be in the wheelhouse of our POV character, Heather. Vocals are a bit of a change to the Yamaoka formula, which is as on point here as it always is. But so is the decision to put the player in the shoes of a teenage girl instead of an adult man. Silent Hill 3 is the second game in the Silent Hill series released for the PlayStation 2, coming out 2 years after Silent Hill 2. Mechanically and aesthetically, it's punching at the same weight as its predecessor, but as I mentioned in my previous review, Silent Hill 2 has cemented itself as the de facto Silent Hill game in many people's eyes. For good reason, I might add. So retrospectively, there are some pretty big shoes to fill with this outing. Not to imply Silent Hill 3 doesn't stand above its predecessors in certain aspects, because when Silent Hill 3 tackles ideas Silent Hill 2 couldn't ever encroach, it's at its best, most especially surrounding its main character. But what is likely the consequence of a rough development, the complete package of Silent Hill 3 feels anemic. It may be strange to imagine today, but on release, Silent Hill 2 was not well liked by its Japanese audience and only a mild success in the United States. According to Masahiro Ito, the principal art director for the Silent Hill series, fans in Japan were dissatisfied with the fact that Silent Hill 2 wasn't a direct sequel to 1. This dissatisfaction, coupled with the original iteration of Silent Hill 3, a rail shooter spin-off, no I'm not kidding, floundering in development, led to plans being scrapped and reforming into the game we know today. Now, you'll read online and find tweets where Ito explains this, but then you'll also get extrapolations over the timeline of events. For instance, the Wikipedia page for Silent Hill 3, and by extension the useless Google AI feature, will claim that Silent Hill 3's development time for the final iteration of the project was 9 months, citing Ito's tweets about the rail shooter version of the title. Nowhere in that tweet does he mention when this version was cancelled, and by extension when SH3 proper began development. Just wanted to clear that up. With all that said, I do believe that the turnaround for the final version of SH3 must have been very quick, especially for the time. Nothing makes this more obvious than the game's length. Silent Hill 3 is a short game. An incredibly short game. Now let me get ahead and say that I have absolutely no issue with short games, but Silent Hill 3's brisk length ends up making the narrative suffer. The story of Silent Hill 3 follows Heather, an unassuming teenage girl who gets approached in a mall one day by a middle-aged detective named Douglas Cartland. Douglas tries to explain that he had been hired to look for her, but understandably, Heather gets creeped out by this guy and escapes through the bathroom window of the mall to evade him. Shortly after this, however, she is confronted by strange monsters and the mysterious Claudia Wolf, who takes this chance encounter to wax about Heather's latent supernatural abilities, and leaves shortly thereafter.
Rebirth of paradise, despoiled by mankind.
What are you talking about?
Don't you know? Your power is needed.
How should I know?
Then suddenly, before Heather's eyes, the mall transforms into a now familiar, grotesque, otherworld version. It's up to Heather to figure out what in the world she has to do with these events and get home safely to her father. Almost immediately, I feel like there's a pacing issue with Silent Hill 3. Never mind the fact that there's a pointless in media res dream sequence, more on that later, but once the story actually begins, Heather is confronted with monsters in record time, as well as introduced to 2 of the 3 secondary characters of the game. It feels as though the narrative has a jet engine strapped to its chest and doesn't trust the player to not get bored without seeing a monster within 2 minutes of pressing start on the title screen. It's very unlike the normally subtle, unnervingly slow intros of the previous Silent Hill games. Maybe that's intentional. After all, the first half of the game doesn't even take place in Silent Hill. A bold choice, I should say. The opening moments of the game in the mall might just be the safest any location has felt in any Silent Hill game thus far. Maybe pulling the rug out abruptly was meant to contrast with that fact, but even if that was true, its execution comes across as clumsy. Just moments after being introduced to Douglas, Heather meets Claudia Wolf, the main antagonist of the game. The player won't be introduced to another character for about an hour afterwards, but once they do come across him, they may be surprised to realize that Vincent is the final major character. I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with the principal cast being smaller than the previous games, but the distribution is totally off. What isn't off, however, are the controls and mechanics. Those who played Silent Hill 2 will find that Silent Hill 3 plays nearly identically to it, like putting on an old pair of shoes. Check out my review of Silent Hill 2 for a more detailed breakdown, but for the broad strokes, I appreciate the return of the modular action and riddle difficulties, as well as the option to play without tank controls. I suppose my only gripe with the gameplay this time around is not much was improved upon. I understand it may be a bit of a rich complaint to have when I showered the previous game with praise, gameplay not exempt, but SH3 has a few differences in its approach that made me a little less excited to play through it. The world is just more dangerous. Enemies are more plentiful, varied, and aggressive. On one hand, I think this is a good thing, since it did get pretty tiring fighting mostly lying figures and mannequins for a majority of the previous outing. The issue is when a lot of these enemies get congregated in narrow corridors and are unable to be avoided. Okay, that's only partly the issue, because if enemies really did get in the way all the time, the simple solution would be to kill them, right? Well, SH3 remembered the survival part of his genre title, and as such, ammo is a lot more scarce this go around. Even during the playthrough I did for this review, where I was fairly stingy with my ammo, I was hurting pretty hard by the end. They clearly intended the player to hold off on constantly firing their pistol, since the melee offerings this time around are much more varied than they were before. Although once the player obtains the katana, there's no looking back. The melee can't handle everything perfectly though. A lot of the low to the ground enemies will manage to get in a hit or two regardless of Heather's swordplay. There is a blocking mechanic, but the input delay makes it tough to use reliably. But, all this whinging aside, I still wouldn't call Silent Hill 3 a difficult game. It's just more difficult than its predecessor in more frustrating ways. One major highlight of Silent Hill 3 are the scares. While SH2 would occasionally pull a gag or two on the player, the amount of horror set pieces in 3 are staggering. Be it a simple loud noise or being pushed onto the railroad tracks by some unknown assailant, SH3 delivers on the horror. There's even a haunted house for crying out loud. And between many of these horror set pieces is a very different undercurrent of horror compared to the previous games, all having to do with the main protagonist, Heather, and her struggles living as a teenage girl. Let's get the big point out of the way. I was raised as, and am, a man, so my analysis of this is limited by my empathy, of which I have a lot. Let's go women. There's lots of analysis online of Heather and her story by women I'd recommend checking out. I found this Eurothug video from a few years ago to be quite well done. Silent Hill 3 extrapolates a lot of horror out of the many, unfortunately, common experiences of growing up as a woman. Uneasiness of public transit, self-defense weaponry, stalkers, a lot of stalkers actually, and the coup de grace, unwanted pregnancy. The whole story revolves around the Order from Silent Hill 1, an evil cult basically, attempting to resurrect their god using Heather as a sort of surrogate mother, similar to Alessa from the first game. This isn't the only thing Alessa and Heather have in common, but we'll get into that later. Team Silent's portrayal of Heather and the struggles of young women is, for the most part, just as harrowing as it is intelligent. By taking these common fears women have and incorporating them into the Silent Hill experience, anyone playing can feel the dread. I can't really say for sure how they managed to pull this off when so many stories have trouble broaching these topics, but Team Silent did have women on the staff at the time, like Motomi Minowa, Minako Asano, Eri Kuwano, and Sachiko Sugawara, just to name a few. These women in particular had roles like assistant and character model designer, which may not seem as important as, say, director or composer, but it takes a village, so to speak. And I wouldn't be surprised if simply their presence on the team caused Heather's portrayal and struggles to be that much more effective. I think it also helps that Heather is just a really good character. She's headstrong, but not some sort of emotionless badass. You get moments where she seems to blow off the unimaginable horror before her eyes, but there's a point right at the end of the game that kind of makes it all click into place, and you realize any sort of zeal and aloofness she has is purely bravado. Another thing that endears me to Heather is her internal voice when interacting with objects in the world. The player can glean a lot of info about her from this incidental text alone, which is refreshing, considering James's more detached, matter-of-fact descriptions of items and locations in Silent Hill 2 could be mistaken for an omniscient narrator approach at times. I think the personal POV fits Heather a lot more. None of this would really work as well for me if Heather didn't have a great voice actress. Heather Morris, the voice actress and the inspiration for the character's name, delivers a fantastic, down-to-earth performance that is far and away the best in the game. Although, even if her performance was only mediocre, it wouldn't be very difficult to outshine the other cast members of SH3, unfortunately. Unlike the previous Silent Hill, where the sometimes stilted and odd voiceovers felt like the point rather than an accident, SH3's voice direction seems like it's playing it much more straightforward. As a result, the rest of the performances suffer, I feel. The voice director was different for this title, and although she had experience with English works like Shenmue, perhaps some sort of language barrier led to lackluster delivery, in the case of many lines from Douglas Cartwright, or absolute whiplash-inducing line reads like with Vincent's performance. Donna Burke as Claudia Wolf is probably the closest in quality to Heather's, so it came as no surprise to find out that Donna is not only the only member of the cast with a prolific voice acting career, but she also voiced Angela in SH2. Maybe it's only fair that the women's performances overshadow the men's in this title. But that pithy one-liner would be doing a little bit of a disservice to both Richard Gross and Clifford Rappel, the former of which has a solid performance for his monologue near the end of the game, and the latter knocking what is likely the most iconic line in the game out of the park.
Monsters. They look like monsters to you? Oh no. Don't worry. It's just a joke.
So I wouldn't completely write them off, but their work just doesn't hold a candle to Heather Morris's performance as Heather Mason. Yes, you heard that right. About halfway through the game, once Heather makes her way back home, she discovers her father, Harry Mason, the protagonist of Silent Hill 1, dead in his chair, with Claudia Wolf and a monstrous creature close by. It doesn't take long for Heather to put two and two together and quickly swear revenge on the cult leader. Claudia flees the scene shortly thereafter, though, but beckons Heather to follow her to Silent Hill. The remainder of the story has Heather and Douglas team up and explore the familiar Silent Hill for Claudia, and an explanation for why exactly Heather is needed for whatever ritual she and the Order cult are planning. Although anyone who has played the original Silent Hill likely already put together the reason why. I think that while Team Silent understood that many fans of Silent Hill 1 would be playing Silent Hill 3, they also knew that just as, if not more, people would jump into this one with no prior knowledge of SH1, or even SH2 for that matter. Which is why I believe that there's this long exposition scene after the big twist reveal to bring everyone up to speed, as well as confirm Silent Hill's location as somewhere in Maine, if that Portland name drop is anything to go off of. No, not that Portland. There we are. As I mentioned earlier, this decision to not even have the characters go to Silent Hill until the halfway mark really is a swing for the fences that I can really respect. It hammers home the surprise of Heather's origin and family. These days, I doubt many players would be super distraught over the death of Harry Mason, but I gotta imagine this was a pretty big gut punch to players who had gone through the original Silent Hill on release. Killing off a beloved character off-screen is usually not taken very well, but besides his fate, there's nothing in Silent Hill 3 that comes off as disrespectful to the memory of Harry Mason. Even without the additional notes of lore that are findable throughout the game, the reverence Heather holds for Harry implies a lot about how great of a father he truly was, which is perfectly in line with his motivation in the first game. So that big swing ends up paying off for Silent Hill 3. What about the other one? Hiding the titular town itself behind the second half of the game? Well, it's a mixed bag, sadly. The idea is perfectly sound, but it falls a little flat for me once the player reaches Silent Hill and Heather is told to explore the abandoned Brookhaven Hospital for clues about the whereabouts of Claudia's father, Leonard. Sadly, the first major area of the Silent Hill section of the game is a revisit to the hospital from Silent Hill 2. At the very least, there is a unique Otherworld section of the hospital to explore, but it still stings that once the player enters the town, there's a large dry spell of truly unique locations, since the next area that Heather is sent to after her work is done in Brookhaven is the Lakeside Amusement Park, a returning location from the finale of Silent Hill 1. This area should be familiar to anyone playing the game, since the beginning section of it is actually the first thing the player does in a playthrough of Silent Hill 3, albeit framed as a dream sequence. I know I already brought this up in passing, but I really dislike how Silent Hill 3 starts out with this preview of the horrors yet to come. 3 already hits the ground running at a record pace. I don't feel like a hot start was necessary to hook players in. Perhaps it was done to reassure players of the original Silent Hill that this new title indeed had a connection to the first. The amusement park was the penultimate level in that game after all. But when there are already so few bespoke areas in SH3, it feels like a waste to spoil its inclusion so early on. Who knows, maybe they just wanted players to be acquainted with Robbie the Rabbit as soon as possible. But if that's the case, then I am similarly not impressed. Okay, so Robbie the Rabbit is one of the mascot characters for the Lakeside Amusement Park, but he's also become a mascot for the Silent Hill series as a whole. Despite the fact that Silent Hill was in no short supply of incredibly iconic monster designs, it was difficult for any one of those creatures to take on the role of a mascot, since the creatures were usually only in one game, as well as inextricably tied with a character from the game of origin. Despite all of that, and much to the dismay of many fans and its very own designer, Pyramid Head, yes, Pyramid Head, stumbled into the mascot role. The close second in the mascot race to Pyramid Head, however, is Robbie, and Robbie has a much better claim to the throne, since he's tied directly to the setting of Silent Hill rather than the mythology. He can be used in any game that features the town, since his conception in-universe theoretically predates the Order. His origin in development is a pretty standard one. Apparently he was thought of after Team Silent member Yasunori Kanatake saw a rabbit mascot character handing out balloons. The juxtaposition of a cutesy mascot character in a demented place like Silent Hill was strong enough imagery for the team to create and put Robbie into the game. The thing is, though, he doesn't really do anything in Silent Hill 3, he's purely set dressing. Regardless, his design was iconic enough, and he wasn't tied to any specific character, so he became a prolific inclusion in future titles. But if I can let you all in on a little secret, I don't really like Robbie the Rabbit. Maybe it's because I don't really care much for mascot horror, but Robbie just feels a little too forced. A cutesy animal costume with blood around the mouth is way too stock of a mascot for a series with some of the most creative and gruesome monster designs in any video game. What's annoying is that Pyramid Head as a design is way better at representing Silent Hill as a franchise than Robbie the Rabbit, but he's also a terrible mascot for all the reasons stated earlier. Silent Hill really is stuck between a rock and a hard place here. Maybe the winning move is to not even play. It's not like the series needs a mascot character anyway. Talk about an aside within an aside. Why don't we wrap this story up? Throughout her exploration of Silent Hill, Heather begins to remember her past life as Alessa, which culminates in a physical showdown between herself and a dark manifestation of her previous life. A version of Alessa that wants to take back control. By defeating it, Heather is effectively closing the book on her previous life as Alessa and resolving herself and moving on from all this Order and Silent Hill nonsense. But there's still one more loose end that needs to be taken care of. Afterwards, Heather finally confronts Claudia, who is awaiting the birth of their god inside of Heather. Vincent's there too, but let's be honest, he's not that important.
To hell!
See? With just moments before the ritual is complete, Heather works up the strength to resist for just a little longer, and control is given back to the player. To prevent a game over, the player has to use the locket item, a gift from Harry, that's been sitting in their inventory for the entire game. It's actually a pretty clever final puzzle, and is hinted at as being useful throughout the story, so it doesn't come out of nowhere. Unless the player immediately realizes that's the solution though, they'll be stuck in this environment where time stands still and Claudia just A-poses in place. I imagine if Team Silent had more time, this moment would have been a little less jank, but I digress. The capsule in the locket causes Heather to vomit the fetus, then Claudia, in a desperate move, consumes the fetus and becomes the vessel for the Order's god herself. This doesn't go very well for her, but at least there's a final boss out of the whole ordeal. With Claudia defeated, Heather can put Silent Hill behind her and finally grieve for her late father.
Is that the end? I guess it's time to roll the credits. Dad!
Silent Hill 3 has a few endings, but once again, most likely as a consequence of its short development time, there are far fewer than the previous games. There isn't really any ambiguity about what the definitive ending is, because while there is an alternate ending and the series staple goofy ending, it's only accessible on a second playthrough, and even then, it's not that interesting. Not to imply that I needed the approach from Silent Hill 2 to return here, I think it makes sense for there to be a canon ending since Silent Hill 1 did the same, but there only being one serious and one silly alternate ending is a little deflating. It seems to me that Team Silent really did the best they could with Silent Hill 3. Its strained development shows. In fact, it shows often. Be it less endings, characters, hell, less hours spent playing the game. And a lot of the content that is present is less sharp overall. But when Silent Hill 3 shines, it really shines. Heather Mason is probably my favorite character in the entire series. It's hard for me to write off Silent Hill 3 entirely because even though I don't like it as much as Silent Hill 2, Silent Hill 2 is Silent Hill 2. Not a lot of video games are better than it. Silent Hill 3 is still above par. I just wish it had the development time it needed to match its predecessor in quality, because I can tell this team was more than capable of catching lightning in a bottle just once more. I wouldn't try and go back in time and change anything though. What we got was surprisingly great in spite of it all. Besides, I'd be worried about A Sound of Thunder scenario where I end up sitting here reviewing Silent Hill Gun Survivor. I seriously cannot believe they were actually going to make that. Like, oh my fucking god.